I just wanted to give some very brief thoughts on the modern state of Christianity overall, and really just the idea of various different forms of Christianity that exist today. I think that it's very common, and in particular for conservative Christians, and I'm not trying to pick on conservative Christians, but they're the ones who take the idea that they are retrieving or have retrieved the original form of Christianity, and the tradition of, let's say, evangelicalism or something like this has been passed down from the very beginning, and so it's sort of unadulterated in some sense. But this is actually kind of a gross mischaracterization of Christian history. The reality is that Christianity, really in any form today, in any culture, is going to be different than, or let's say, original Christianity, right, from the early church. That is to say, it has evolved over time. And sure, there are some ideas that have been passed down from really early on in Christian history, but there are very many that were not. They were discarded. And so it's sort of like this, almost like a grab bag of doctrine or orthodoxy type beliefs that we've just decided to keep or not. And what's important to understand with this is that the development and change of theological ideas, that's been an inherent part of the Christian movement even from its very inception. Not even the earliest Christians or theologians agreed on everything. I mean, we have examples even just in our modern Bible of Peter and Paul and James not fully agreeing on everything, and it required a council to try to figure out what it is that they should, keep and maintain throughout their community. And that's the kind of thing that has always happened. So the idea, for example, that liberal Christians are just they're just kind of molding to the culture, or they're shifting in the sands because of the choices that they want to make, or because of the preferences that they have. I mean, this is, first of all, I think, an unfair way of articulating it, but ultimately what it really is just a continuation of the Christian tradition. It's something that we've always done. We've changed based on a variety of factors, whether cultural or scientific or other. And so I think that's one of probably two main things that are important here. The idea that change is a part of the tradition, and we shouldn't be worried about that, or we shouldn't consider it heresy or something like this. But the other thing is, any form of Christianity today, especially something like conservative evangelical Christianity, is not a direct reflection of the earliest type of Christianity. If anything, Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy would be much closer to early Christianity. And I've talked elsewhere about how modern fundamentalism and evangelicalism evolved in our culture. And fundamentalism, for example, doesn't mean that it retrieves the fundamentals of the Christian faith at all. There are other factors that were involved in that definition that emerged from that movement in the 20th century in particular. And there are a variety of theological ideas that, again, were just kind of grabbed from different points in history. So it's really just a mischaracterization to imagine that we can, or that we represent, some original form of Christianity today. Really, the broadest sense of trying to understand this is, the early Christians kind of emerged into the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Church, and those two churches split really over the idea of the nature of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. So, I mean, that right there from really early on is a major theological difference. But in any case, as we know, what came from the Catholic movement was the Protestant Reformation, and so then Protestantism, which splintered into many, many different sects, and from that ultimately eventually came liberalism, and then fundamentalism and evangelicalism, and all of the different forms of it that exist today, such as Baptists and Presbyterians, and non-denominational is kind of a newer iteration of all of this. So it would just be flatly wrong to suggest that, again, for example, the main binary that's considered in our modern culture is the conservative versus liberal camps, but that's really just too broad. That doesn't really capture the nuance of the various different views of Christian beliefs. But it's also just inaccurate to suggest that any one of them is an exact replication of what early Christians were like. So we just need to keep this in mind in our discussions, say interdenominationally or even interreligiously, and just keep track of the idea that we're all just trying to figure out what we believe is true and how to live into that as best as we can based on what we do know, and build our beliefs out of that. So yeah, just keep it in mind.